So, Deltarune Chapters 3 and 4 are officially released, and as such there are plenty of secrets to be explored along with some very interesting things we need to talk about. Hopefully things that a lot of you will probably want to know how to do, or at least what they are. But first, if you haven't played through Chapters 3 and 4, then warning, there will be spoilers for Deltarune Chapter 3 in this video, so if you don't want anything to be spoiled, then this is your chance to click off. But if you are already aware of these secrets, then be sure to comment what your favorite one was in the comment section down below. But that aside, welcome to Epoch, your favorite place for everything indie game related, and let's talk about some Deltarune secrets you might have missed. In the start of the chapter, the couch that Susie and Chris are asleep on is the same couch from the Light World, and is meant to be the place where you can choose to fall asleep at with Chris. But if you instead walk to the right, then the couch will begin walking and you will no longer be able to sleep at it anymore. In the cutscene where Tenna is introduced, there are several references to the Spamton sweepstakes event, such as the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the egg, which is definitely meant to be Pippa's, and of course, Mr. and Tenna's TV time featuring Spamton theme. When Tenna speaks, there are occasionally these colored pieces of text, which when looked at next to Spamton's dialogue seem vaguely similar to the places where Spamton speaks in square brackets, and it could be possible that Spamton's dialogue is trying to do what Tenna's dialogue does here. When showing off prizes, Tenna references the Icy Van, which gets renamed to Family Van almost immediately, and also has a Rose plushie, but it makes you wonder if the reason Icy's was covered up was because Tenna wasn't sponsored or some other reason. In that same sequence of the game, Tenna says not to touch that dial because we're gonna have one heck of a show, but is cut off by Susie, and interestingly enough, there's a Deltarune fan game called One Heck of a Ride, which is nearly word for word what Tenna says here. When the phonometer pops up on the screen, the Spamton theme plays slightly, also being a possible reference to the fun values in Undertale, though there is a more direct reference to those when Tenna shuts down in the boss fight for the chapter, shutting down on the number 66. The same number as the fun value where you meet the man behind the door, who many people say is supposed to be Gaster. When in the sequence where you get to choose your name, there are some special names that will get an extra piece of dialogue, such as naming yourself Cry, which will get Tenna to say don't cry until the ending folks, along with several other names that will get a special reaction. When Tenna boots up the first game for us to play, you can briefly see the name it was supposed to have, which judging by the looks it was supposed to say Mantle, but was switched to the Legend of Tenna. And speaking of the Legend of Tenna, it is a direct reference to the original Legend of Zelda in the way it looks, and also the music sounds very similar in style to the songs from that game. But a more direct reference will come later in a more secret spot that requires the player to get an S-rank score throughout the first game board. And in order to get that score, in the first fight of the game, Tenna will explain the rules about how to get a good fighting score, and if you do well enough by not getting hit, getting a lot of TP, and winning in the least amount of turns possible, then you'll be able to get a secret T rank, probably T for Tenna, which will drastically help you get S rank for the entire board. In this room with the pyramids, you can actually push this one to the side, opening up a secret room with all of Tenna's fan mail, but the room is empty, to which Tenna replies, "Who needs mail anyway?" Probably referencing not needing Spamton as he is associated with mail, though it seems as if Tenna is slightly disappointed about not having the mail. When in this quiz, you will encounter a question about Lancer that is the exact same as the one in the Undertale Deltarune Twitter page, meaning that that was a direct spoiler of something in-game. When fighting El Niño and La Niño, you will have the opportunity to pick one, and whichever one you pick will be the one that you will have to pick up later on the second game board, but along with that will also be important for another secret in the later sections of Chapter 3. When in the green room, there is a vending machine that you can talk with, and though it doesn't respond to you when talking after the first or second board, when you come back here after everything is much colder, it does actually have slightly different dialogue. If your overall score was S rank on the first board, there is a room you can access at the top right of the green room, though if you didn't get it, then it's still possible to get into by paying 1500 points to this NPC at the bottom room, which will give you a fake S rank, allowing you to go inside the room regardless. But along with that, there's a third, more secret way to get into the room by just getting Z rank, a rare rank only achievable by getting the worst possible score on the board, as well as in the minigames. If you do happen to get this, you will still be locked locked out of the S rank room, but if you go in the room to the right, you will be able to access a room for Z rankers, which has a telephone as well as a poster referencing Spamton Antenna's business partnership. And going down the manhole will bring you to the area which will allow you to play the secret game. Speaking of which, going to the left will bring you to a version of the game you just played, though in its original form with a sword for Chris, and the game directly references Chapter 2's weird route where defeating every monster is the only way to get strong enough to eventually break the cactuses in this room, and then after defeating every monster again, you can break the trees to finally open a chest with an ice key, which you'll need for the second board of the secret game. Also inside the secret game, there is a sword that Chris receives that looks very similar to the Master Sword, further linking this game inside the game to the original Legend of Zelda. And also it is worth noting that the room where you obtain the sword is the same room that contained Tenna's fan mail, or lack thereof. When visiting the room right next to the S rank room, you will have 3 separate doors that correspond with the ranks you could have received, though if you got S rank then they should all be accessible, and in the C rank room you will be able to fight a water cooler mini-boss, which surprisingly is extremely difficult and also has some questionable dialogue prompts. In this room behind the B rank door, you'll find a gumball machine which can give you several prizes, which I would recommend trying to get all of them before you do this next part, but when it is done, if you put exactly 1,225 points into the machine, referencing Christmas Day, then you'll be taken to a secret area in which you find a blue gumball machine, which dispenses something that by its description sounds like a shadow crystal or something along those lines. And you'll also get this creepy piece of dialogue saying that you couldn't find your hand. When you're about to visit the second board, Susie mentions that Tenna is off to the left and decides to go talk with him, which allows you and Ralsei to close your eyes and see what Susie is doing. And when Tenna and Susie are talking, Tenna mentions that he isn't sure if Chris likes TV, which is interesting because when fighting Tenna at the end of the chapter, Chris deals much more damage than anybody else in the party when attacking, meaning Tenna is probably correct about Chris in this regard. When Tenna talks about the sponsor, that being the Dark Fountain, the theme from Your Power plays briefly in the background, which is a song that plays as the Dark Fountain is sealed in chapters 1 and 2, though it surprisingly doesn't play in chapter 2's weird route. When on the second board, there's a raft ride that you are able to do, and if you decide to go all the way up from the left side, you will encounter something that is only intended to be seen in the secret version of the game in the S rank room. And after that, Tenna cuts the show for a few seconds and blocks off the area, preventing further exploration. During the Lightner's live minigame, the lyrics before they're played by the party are different from what is displayed afterwards, the lyrics being much darker than what the replacement is. Also, an interesting note is it talks about baseball bats, which are closely linked to December holiday, and overall the song sounds like something December would listen to, seeing as Dessa's room seems like it is intentionally rebellious and somewhat angsty. In the secret version of the game behind the S rank door, we get to visit the place that Tenna blocked off on the normal board, which leads us to a place which talks about how the Forbidden Path began with ice magic, along with an ice mage joining our party, which after going through the dungeon and freezing a Birdly replacement, we get to a door which will use up the ice key and then it will say she was used up, possibly talking about Noelle, who is represented by the ice mage. And then afterwards you will receive the shelter key, directly referencing the shelter at the bottom of Hometown, and then it will say you were used up. Safe to say it's pretty disturbing stuff all around. In this section, the computers on the wall and the codes we see are very interesting, one of which being the exact same as the amount of points we need to put inside the gumball machine. Also, on a separate note, did all of this section remind anyone else of One Shot and a specific world machine? Speaking of worlds, the song that plays in the background of this section, TV World, is a song that Toby Fox made all the way back in 2016, and was used in this section of the Chapter 3 Dark World. The cowboy section that Toby said might be scrapped ended up being used after all, as well as the sneaking section, though the sneaking music is still unused, which is rather sad, but it was arguably replaced with a much better song. Throughout this section, there are various green TV screens that when interacted with open up secret areas with some special interactions. There's this one where you see whether or not love or hate won, and there are some special scenes based on whether you chose El Niño or La Niña in the chapter, though only if hate won. If love wins, they just end up smooching. In this room behind a green TV screen, you will have a special interaction with Tenna, which changes depending on whether you fought Spamton or not, because with Spamton in your inventory, he will hop out and talk to Tenna, which leads to an absolutely hilarious scene, though on the weird route, Spamton won't show up regardless of whether or not the item is in your inventory. Here is where the big secrets start coming into play. The egg in Chapter 3 is pretty difficult to obtain, considering it takes more preparation than either the Chapter 1 or 2 eggs. But in this room, after completing the puzzle, you can throw this box across the river into this crevice. Then once you get to this place, you'll have to get caught by this light, say you're a cheater, and say you're going nowhere. Then push the box to get to this room, then after talking to this NPC in the game over and over, you will be able to open the wardrobe, then talk to the NPC again to obtain the ticket. Then after leaving the room, go to this rabbit in the dumpster right here, and inside the fight, when acting, you'll be able to move left with the soul. Then after moving upwards, you'll be able to get the egg from the man behind the tree. Although there is some interesting text from some of the NPCs in this room that you should probably check out, such as this one asking for a photocopied Chris to play with them, most likely referencing the vessel. After completing that, I would recommend going to the secret room one last time to complete the area there, and once you've gotten the sword, you will have to attack Susie and Ralze inside the game, causing Chris to flinch slightly. Then you can move to the right, and after opening up the bunker, you will be inside the final area for the secret minigame, in which you'll have to defeat all the enemies one last time, which actually brings an interesting thing, as this mimic enemy has a separate file associated to its sprite, that being a black and brown deer, which is likely representing December holiday. But after you finish defeating the rest of the enemies in the area, something very interesting happens. If you haven't played through the game and don't want it spoiled, this is your last chance before I talk about it. When in this room, you will encounter the Shadow Mantle, and depending on whether you're on the weird route or not, the dialogue will be slightly different before the fight. The Shadow Mantle taunting Chris about saying it wasn't them that did that to Noelle, or depending on the interpretation, it could be talking to us, the player, as well. But regardless, after the difficult fight against the Shadow Mantle, you will have to walk out of the screen, attack Chris, and then you'll be able to move upwards and obtain the Shadow Mantle from the box here. After obtaining the Shadow Mantle, Susie will enter the room, which when this normally happens, she will give Chris a soda then leave the room. But if you hold left, then the 8-bit Chris will walk on screen, and if you attack, then a special scene with Chris and Susie will play out, in which Chris pulls Susie away from the 8-bit version, although instead of being suspicious, Susie just thinks Chris is trying to get a taste of the shampoo that Susie uses, since she drank some of the shampoo from Chris's house. Now, this is the biggest secret for the chapter, and if you haven't played through Chapter 3 yet, then I would highly recommend doing that before I talk about this secret, as there are major spoilers with this last one. With that being said, the final fight of the chapter, as many of you are already aware, is the Roaring Knight, the technical secret boss of Chapter 3, as although you're supposed to lose the fight, there is a way to win to some degree, although the only thing that changes is that you'll get an extra weapon for Chris as well as a Shadow Crystal. When playing through the fight, it is extremely important that you have these Shadow Mantles, since it is almost impossible to win without it, requiring insane precision. But even with the Shadow Mantle, this fight is nothing to scoff at, requiring you to attack with Susie, which is the party member I would recommend equipping the Shadow Mantle to, and with Chris and Ralze, it is best to defend to save up TP for Susie's Rude Buster. When the fight is near completion, you will absolutely know, since the knight will have this final attack reminiscent of the Hyper Goner in the Azrael Dreamer fight, which when completed will give you the chance to end the fight with Susie, and when that is over, a cutscene will play where Susie chips a piece of the knight's weapon off and then gets struck down by the knight along with Ralze. Though surprisingly, Chris is the only character that the knight doesn't attack, possibly because they are working together, but this is a details and secrets video, not a theory video. So with that being said, once the knight leaves with Undyne, you will have the item in your inventory, dealing much more damage than any other weapon that Chris can equip, and it makes many of the encounters in Chapter 4 much easier than normal. But with that being said, that was all of the 34 Deltarune details and secrets that you may have missed in Chapter 3, and although there are plenty of other little things that could have been noted, such as unique flavor text inside the egg room or special dialogue about Spamton from the 8-bit Tenna in the secret game, I think it's best that we leave some of the things for everyone to find on their own, since it hasn't been very long since the release of Deltarune Chapters 3 and 4. And considering this is my first video covering Deltarune Chapters 3 and 4, if you're watching this video before Chapter Chapter 5 releases, then consider yourself as a semi-OG. Despite only getting here after Chapters 3 and 4 release, this channel is still very young and any and all support on the channel is greatly appreciated. Even if you decide not to subscribe, just watching these videos through helps support the channel more than you can imagine. And speaking of supporting the channel, I would like to thank the channel members that have come in over the last 2 weeks, as well as giving each of the members a special shout out for joining the channel as one of the OGs. With all that out of the way, this has been Epoch, your favorite place for everything indie game related, and I hope I will see you all in the next one.